This edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Are you on the right path? Will you ever experience real manhood? Young men 18 to 30 are warriors. That awesome stage of life where everything's on the line. Wichita State University conducted a study to answer the question, what makes for a healthy mentoring relationship? Highlights of that study forms a basis for some of the insights our next guest brings to light in this new work. With biblical principles for mentoring as well as advice for warriors in 6 key areas of life: self-management, life skills, education, career, relationships, faith, and identity, this book has something for you. David Riffel is founder and executive director of Mentoring Warriors, an organization dedicated to equipping men to mentor and prepare warriors, young men ages 18 to 30, for life. Having gone through his warrior years essentially mentorless, God has placed in David a heart for warriors to come alongside them as they figure life out. David and his Canadian wife live in Kansas. They have 2 married children and enjoy spending their time at the family cottage in Ontario. David may be reached through his website at mentoring-warriors.com. Joining us now to talk about his new book, Mentoring Warriors, coming alongside men 18 to 30 years old, is David Riffel. David, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
It's a pleasure to be with you online here today.
Well, we're delighted to have you, David. Take us back to your recognizing your journey to faith as not having a mentor, and what impact that had on you in retrospect as to your faith journey, your identity, all those things that you help shape in others today. You had your own journey, which you had to navigate without one. How was
Sure.
how was that for you?
Yeah, it's not like life didn't have successes for me, particularly in my 20s. I'm an architect, I'm a partner in a firm. There's a lot of things that happen, and I eventually did get married and all of that. But in the midst of that, I was having this conversation actually just recently with one of my uncles out in California, and we were messaging back and forth, and he asked the question in a really interesting way. He said, "So Dave, really what the issue is you really had no one that took the time to know you, to know who you were as a young man." And I said, "Yeah, that's about it." And I think it wasn't that there weren't men in my life. I mean, I was raised in a good family, my parents, my dad, my mom, etc., my sisters. And it wasn't that I didn't hear about the gospel or anything like that, and I made some choices. But I found that for who I was as a young guy, going through adolescence and young adulthood, there really was nobody investing in me. And maybe some of the things that I struggled with most kind of boil down to 2 questions that I think are innate in what God puts into each one of us as men, from the time we're born, a toddler, till probably the day we die. And those 2 questions seem to be, does anybody on the planet actually delight in me? Is there anybody that really, does my life matter? And a lot of times it's our father, that we want to go to and say, "Dad, do you delight in me?" But the other question on that list is, do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes to become a man? Do I have what it takes to be that next step in life? And I think a lot of times when identity, it really boils down to those 2 questions. Are they being answered? And, had I had a mentor, had those questions been answered, there's probably would have been some things about my faith journey, my walk with Christ, understanding life and how it works, His sovereignty, probably would have been answered a little better, and I probably would have responded better to some of the challenges I faced. So I would say those are probably things, and I think because I didn't have a mentor, God also used that to put an ache in my soul. An ache for other guys that are going through that, a desire to, hey, come alongside, as I say sometimes, been there, done that, bought the T-shirt. Let me walk with you through this. Let's see what we can do to grow. You can grow in your manhood. So, that's kind of maybe a general answer to mentoring or being mentorless and how that affected me.
Your identity in Messiah, when did that really become something that you owned, that you had real clarity that this was not the faith of your parents, the faith of your pastor, your faith of your youth leader, but became your own faith, and then began to really be that new creation that God had called you to be? Was that something that you struggled with because there was no one to guide you, shepherd you on a one-on-one basis, and so it was kind of navigating as, okay, I'm the captain of this ship, but I have no charts, I have no logbook, I have no training in understanding currents, tides, and weather, and so I'm there on the right sea, on the right boat, but I'm just a little bit adrift and don't know the destination, but I'm on the journey.
Right. I'd say there's two parts to that. When I was about 12, I think I would have been sixth grade maybe, the connection between Christmas and Easter, Christ's coming, Christ's death, burial, resurrection, they finally connected in my 12-year-old brain. And I realized I had a need for Christ. And I made a conscious decision to trust him. But I will tell you, through the next several years, up until I was about 16, because I was not even discipled per se, by the time I was 15 or 16, I was negotiating with mom and dad how little I was living this duplicit life. It was really what I was. When I was 16, one of my good friends, Kevin, was killed in a car train wreck. His dad was the pastor of a small church out in the Flint Hills of Kansas, and he was learning to drive, and he picked up all the kids in the little church youth group to go swimming on a Sunday afternoon, and he didn't see the train. And the train T-boned the little station wagon, and 6 of those 8 kids were killed. So I remember that weekend my cousin and I had gone down to Oklahoma for a canoe trip, 2 16-year-old boys, made it back alive, but woke up the next morning and found out that my friend Kevin was killed. And that blew me away. I mean, 16-year-olds aren't supposed to die, right? And when I knew Kevin, he was the guy that was walking with Jesus. He was the guy that was willing to take the stand and, to be honest, sometimes in school, in high school, junior high, being bullied about it. And I went to his funeral. And I write about this in my book. When you're 16 and you walk into a gymnasium of a high school that's been turned into a funeral service for 6 caskets, 6 bodies, and they get to Kevin, and even brings emotions to me right now. And I think about Kevin's life, and I remember they were up there talking about him. They had his Bible, and it was highlighted and underlined, and verses in the Old Testament and verses in the New, and they talked about how even as a 7th grader, he'd get up at 5:30 in the morning to have a time with the Lord. And I realized light bulb came on. No wonder my walk has not been going anywhere. It's been floundering. And it's because I have not intentionally pursued my own personal walk with Christ to have him speak to me. So they're at a funeral. I didn't walk forward or anything like that. But I said, all right, God, you got me. You got me. So I said, all right, I'm going to start reading your word daily. Now, this is quite a few decades ago, but let's just say that I have spent faithfully, the Lord's been good to me, and walking with the Lord in his word through some pretty tough times in life, even through some of those mentorless 20s. He's been my anchor. He really has been. And I think probably if you answer your question, or to answer your question, when did it start to come real for me? It's when Kevin was killed. I had a chance here a couple of years ago just to talk with his parents who live in Wichita, here where I'm at. And even, the fact that their son, who died so many decades ago, can have an impact on people today is just really moving and really, really brings to light what God can even do through some tragedies.
Well, it's amazing that is the message of the Bible, is that through death comes new life. And so in this case, your friend Kevin literally laid down his life, and you are the product of the new regenerated life through the death of someone close to you. It became personal. This is the ultimate goal we have in understanding who Jesus was and that relationship with him who died for us. And so Kevin was your kind of Jesus, and Jesus was your Kevin, and it was through this experience that was the wake-up call that you needed. The concept of mentoring, we advocate on this program a great deal of mentoring for older couples to come alongside of young couples and to take that 40-year marriage, that 45-year marriage, and to grab a hold of a young, newly married 23 and 24-year-old, which seems to be a new age, that they're coming out of college and the next year they're getting married. It seems to be a new trend that I'm seeing, and I presided over many of them in that age group, different than it was when well, maybe a little bit similar, but different in my life. But when we think of young men and developing that mentoring relationship, I'm reminded of a friend of mine who is was a pastor of the church that I bought for my congregation, and he is on staff with the University of Alabama. And he's the chaplain for the team. He's also a professor. And he has committed his life for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and which is mentoring. It's a mentoring program for Christian athletes. And so he comes alongside of these young men and speaks into their life. I happen to know one that he has mentored and seen in Connor this incredible development and hunger and change, and then his answer for calling to ministry because of this mentoring relationship. In today's COVID environment, how is that reshaping these conversations, these programs? Can they really be done virtually? Is there a need for one-on-one? I also think about some of the exposure that mentors have and some of the abuses. I'm a Penn State alumni. So the huge scandal of Penn State that was exposed so many years ago, the scandal of the Catholic Church, the scandal of the Boy Scouts of America. These were, quote unquote, supposed to be mentoring relationships that went very much awry. Has that had an impact on mentoring and on people wanting to mentor and people feeling called to mentor?
I would say yes, all of those factors are playing into it. I know the issue of the virus right now is isolation. And there are some times where you can Zoom call, you can Skype call, and sometimes that helps. But there still needs to be really mentoring, that kind of life on life. I think about Jesus. He spent time with his disciples, and doing life together. And so we've had to, just in some of the guys that I've mentored, we've had to kind of manage and work through that and figure out how do we handle it. If they've got COVID, how do we stay in touch, and vice versa. But I would say, as much as it's happened over 2020, I would say that what it has done, at least for the young guys that I mentor, it has strengthened some of those needs, because what happens is when they get isolated, they realize that's not a good place for them to be. They need relationships. Some of the guys that I talk with that want to mentor think what we do at Mentoring Warriors is a program. And I'm like, well, programs add structure, but it's really about the relationship. And how do you build one where Christ is at the center? You bring up something that's really interesting about the issue of abuse. Um, Here a couple months ago, we did an 8-week Mentoring Warriors boot camp. And in that boot camp here in Wichita, we led men through my book. We walked through my book. We talked about a lot of principles in it. We brought in some different people that were either referenced or interviewed in my book or different sources. But one of the things we talked about was this issue of integrity and accountability. Um, there really is no place for what I call the lone mentor, the lone rogue, you're just doing your own thing. I really think that there needs to be, if you're going to mentor, and God's called you to that, you need to have some sense of accountability, some sense of authority. So, let's just say for an example, Lord's really working on your heart and you just really see a need to mentor, which is in the case what happened for me, how I got started about 10 years ago. Be willing to come under maybe the authority of the elders of your church or under some people that can hold you accountable. And in fact is one of the things we talked about in our boot camp was maybe we need to get some background checks done on us. So there's a level of integrity that we can have. We're in some early conversations right now with a ministry here in Wichita that works with youth, from age 18 down. And they have a lot of checks and balances in place because a lot of times when you're mentoring, you may start off with a young man, he's 16 or he's 17, he's a minor. There are things there that affect the way you mentor as opposed to the next stage of life when he's more 18 and older, he's more of an adult. But I believe some of that background check, some of that integrity, people that can vouch for you is extremely important. It really is.
I'm glad to hear you say that because, there's things we tend not to talk about. We keep it hidden in the darkness. And one of the things that this program is called Revealing the Truth. And so we're going to talk about all sides in the spectrum of mentoring, and that is accountability, and that's oversight, and not putting yourself in a compromised position, and how do you avoid that, and you address that. And that's one of the reasons I brought it out is because you do talk about accountability, you do talk about this. And so as people may feel the tug to get involved in mentoring and then become a little bit overwhelmed with liability, exposure, what if there's an accusation, all those things. Well, there is a fail-safe mechanism that you're trying to put in place that's going to keep that from happening. And that's for the protection of the individual, it's the protection of the young man you're mentoring, and all around, we need to become more aware of accountability in this separated, isolated time of COVID. There are people who are struggling that need that phone call. They need that touch point. And right now, I think there is a desperate need, especially in the 18 to 30, who have now either in some state in university, where that might be not on campus, doing everything virtual, but yet still in the dorm. And so they're not having the social interaction they used to have. And we're seeing suicide rates, we're seeing depression rates, anxiety rates, people crying out for help, the suicide hotlines, the psychologists are being called and doing more telemedicine than they've ever even envisioned during this very difficult time. But imagine if I had a mentor that I could call, or that could call me and check on me and speak into my life, that I would feel connected. And I think that's the bottom line of mentoring, is connected versus disconnected, guided, tethered versus free flying. Tethered is a concept where you are anchored and you can still soar, but yet you can't drift away. You can't
Right.
just be gone.
Right.
And those questions, do I matter? That's something that people in ministry
Hmm.
struggle with a lot, because you're the checker. There's no one that checks on you.
Hmm.
You're the minister. People aren't calling to say, hey, how you doing?
Right.
That's not in the vocabulary. That's not in the lexicon. That's not in the relationship guide, is that there's a person behind the pastor. There's a person behind the rabbi. So when we look statistically at the classifications of the loneliest jobs, dentist used to be at the top of the list. Pastor has now surpassed dentist at the top of the list of the loneliest, most isolating jobs that there are. It's ranked number one because there's people don't check on the welfare of the pastor. He's busy checking on the welfare of others. And it's a reminder that pastors need a touch point as well. It can't be familial because, or familiar, because then you aren't able to counsel with somebody you have kind of crossed this line with. I think that mentoring is something that is needed in ministry,
Right.
ministry itself, as well
Right.
as ministering to others as well.
So I want to comment to that is very interesting while you're talking about that, because you're right. I mean, even in my role as executive director and founder, who's checking up on me, right? Who's holding me accountable? Now, thankfully, I have a board of directors, and one of the, in particular, men on my board is a pastor friend of mine, and has over 20 some years of youth ministry. And so a lot of times, he just told me this he told us at our boot camp a couple months ago. I can tell him about some things that maybe I'm dealing with a young man. He gives me some good feedback, and I never have to mention who that young man is. And, because there's a possibility he may know who that young man is. But he said that's one of the areas where he helps me to be accountable, but I get some feedback if I'm dealing with a young man in crisis. The other side that some of you may maybe think about this too, you mentioned. What I've noticed is I'm kind of known as the triage disciple maker. I take a lot of times guys in crisis and get them stabilized. And one of the things I've noticed is when they start to get healthy, they start asking me how I'm doing. They start asking me, well, Dave, how can I help you? What can I do for you? Then I start to realize this mentoring is now reciprocal. They're starting to understand the value of what it means to speak into somebody else's life. So that's something I've noticed in some of the young guys that I mentor with is when they start to ask me, Dave, how are you doing? What can I do for you? I realize we're moving out of that crisis mode and they're starting to get healthy. So that's just some things I've noticed in the way I
What you're
mentor.
talking about is, if I might use a practical example, is nobody invests without expecting some kind of return on their investment.
Right.
And you may invest early and know that there's a delayed or deferred return,
Right.
but you expect a higher return on the more delayed investment. Let's say you
Hmm.
wait for the payback to begin in 4 or 5 years on a longer
Right.
term investment, but ultimately you do look for a return on that investment, or why would you invest? And
Right.
so in your case, you have some barometers which are in place that show you that you're turning the corner on investing, moving into a return on investor, and you begin then training on the next generation of mentors. And I think that the pipeline has to be built this way,
Hmm.
is that as older couples, older individuals look for their role in being engaged and called into something, there are not that many congregations that have formal mentoring programs as part
Hmm.
of their roster
Hmm.
of service offerings.
Right.
But yet there's a need. So how do you fill the pipeline? Well, these 30-year-olds become 45-year-olds, and then because they've been mentored and you stay connected with them, they become the pipeline for future generations of
Right.
mentors, and it becomes a self-priming pump, if you
Right.
will, that then begins to grow in magnitude, but it has to start somewhere. And
Yeah.
so this is the genesis of creating a generation or the next generation of
Right.
mentors that see the value in mentoring. You saw the value because you were mentorless,
Right.
right? So there was a void that needed to be filled. As you're filling this void for others, you're also giving them a vision of being invested in, and then turning the corner to starting to reinvest, kind of like reinvesting a dividend.
Right. Yeah.
And then it takes them and moves them into, okay, so now that you have passed this 30 age, as now you're a warrior, what are you going to do with that? And are you called to
Right.
then join together with us to begin to mentor as well? And I think that's the beauty of what it is that you're putting out there, is that there is a long view of this becoming something that can invest in a lot of people's lives if people will get on board early.
You know, it's interesting. You bring up a really good points. There are a couple things I want to make comment about. One is, if you look at history, biblical times, you look through even up to maybe the last 150 years ago, there was a lot of one generation working alongside, speaking into the other generation, the next generation. And it's sort of like, to be honest with you, one of the maladies in the church you mentioned is we don't know how to mentor. We're so siloed in our generational thinking. You and I are thinking about my own life, right? I'm not thinking about the next generation. I'm not thinking about anything like that. But the reality is, the Great Commission says we are to go about by the authority of Jesus Christ to go and make disciples. That's what mentoring is all about. And so in Scripture, I love 2 Timothy 2:2. And when I mentor, I try to drill into these young guys, are you going to become a 2 Timothy 2:2 man? And, you know, here's Paul investing his life into Timothy. And Timothy was probably, what, 20s, 30s, maybe? But, you know, he was being trained up in the faith and to lead churches. But the deal on that is, what does he say? Paul says to Timothy, Tim, the things that you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. That's 4 generations. Paul to Timothy, to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. One of the most exciting things for me is, just give you an example of a young guy, Luke, that I've probably mentored him for 3.5 years now, pouring into his life, working through things. He's in his early 20s. Last summer, he's at a helping kind of counsel at a church camp. I think it's mostly middle school, high school kids. And I guess he said the Lord really spoke to him. He says, you know what? Dave's been pouring into my life. How come I'm not doing that and pouring into somebody else's? So now he's mentoring 2 late high school age guys, you know? And it's very exciting to see the fact that he's got the light bulb came on. I can think of another young man, 22 years old, and he's already figured it out. And I always tease with those old guys, these young guys are showing us up because they're starting to figure it out. Sometimes I'll get from older guys like, you know, Dave, look, I've made mistakes in my finances. I've done this wrong, that wrong, you know, and I'm like, so? Yeah, but I'm like, so? I said, here's my deal. It doesn't matter that you're broken. In fact, God often uses broken people the best. The question is, in your brokenness, in those failures, in those struggles, are you allowing the Lord to teach you, to father you in those? And if yes, you know what? Not perfectly, but increasingly, you have the opportunity to use even some of your journey to come alongside those young men. The joy and the value to think that if I invest in somebody else's life, that generations down the road are going to know of Christ and know the gospel because of what I've done today, oh my gosh, that's more exciting than architecture that I do all day, because it has an eternal impact on the souls of men.
And it's so
So,
interesting that if you talk to this age group, they have in their mind that if you were to ask them, do you want a Proverbs 31 wife? And they all say, well, of course I do.
yeah,
But nobody talks about what it means to be a Proverbs 31 man. What
right,
kind of man was the husband of this woman who he wasn't envious of her position or the sway that she had in the
right,
community, and that he was able to support her and to encourage her and to be a light to her so she could
hmm
be esteemed in the city and esteemed and blessed by her children, that their children would call her blessed. It requires the certain attributes of a Proverbs 31 man, but
right,
we don't emphasize that. We don't focus on the attributes of the character of one that could, in the context of that season in the Jewish world, as
hmm
to what that really meant and the magnitude and the weight of that position that she was in.
yeah,
What extraordinary attributes did her husband exhibit
hmm
to allow for us to look at this from King Solomon's perspective
hmm
of what it takes to do that? And that requires mentorship. That requires helping to do it. Because what examples do we have? If mom and dad aren't the leading example, if I take the millennial view, I see mom and dad go to church on Sunday. They act holy on Sunday. They've never opened a Bible in the home. I've never heard them pray. I've never seen them
hmm
ever have a word about the Lord, except we have to be there on Sunday. And I find that somewhat hypocritical.
hmm
Why do they put on a show on Sunday and I never hear another word about it? I don't see them behave. They fight like everybody else fights. I hear language like any other language. They watch R-rated movies. They do these things, but yet on Sunday we've got to look a certain way. And there's now this pullback in saying, well, wait a second, it's not relevant.
hmm
If it's not relevant to be applied 7 days a week, why is it relevant to invest even an hour if I'm not going to be that way? And so we don't have these strong role models of maybe grandparents or a generation gone by who has now passed on that had that, where it was the standard in the home and it was a part of the daily discipline and it was a part of daily. It doesn't exist that way because of the busyness and the technology
right,
and all these things that have come into play. And
right,
so they are floundering in their identity in Messiah because they don't have the role models in the home, which is
hmm
what they pattern. You parent like your father parented, whether you like it or not, whether you swore the same vow I did. I'll never say those words to my child, what my father said to me. And
hmm
I can't tell you how many times I said exactly those words that I swore I would never say. And how many conversations I've had with my 31-year-old daughter about those very things that we can talk about today,
hmm
of what shaped me as a parent in her formative years, that now I've been able to break away from that because
hmm
she actually mentored me to become the father and the grandfather I am today, because we had an open dialogue about the mistakes that I made. So
right.
it's kind of a shift in roles, but we also progress along those lines. We're talking with David Riffel, author of the book Mentoring Warriors, coming alongside men 18 to 30 years old. You can find more about him at mentoring-warriors.com. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what mentoring looks like, the give and take, the probative but yet not invasive, how to build trust and relationship that is going to be transformational by using the model of Messiah, not the model of the mentor, as being what is introduced into this equation, so that it's not all about me and me doing the right thing and having you try to pattern yourself after me or after Dave, but using the example of Scripture and the model of Messiah to help lead, guide, and direct the lives of young men. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, host of Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, seen every week on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network. Our daily on-demand programming is available on our Apple and Android apps and on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. We broadcast live Monday through Friday through our apps, on our website, ignitingnation.com, and on Facebook Live. You can listen daily on our audio platforms on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, and iHeart. Our lineup of best-selling authors bring you the most in-depth biblical insights into the most pressing issues of our time, including prophecy, Israel, spiritual warfare, and a wide variety of contemporary Christian issues impacting the body of Messiah around the globe. If you missed the live show, you can always catch up on the Igniting Nation YouTube channel. Follow us on social media and join us as we endeavor to heal the nations with the Word of God.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to study right by my side through the Biblical Truth Library. Imagine having access to over 1,000 hours of audio and video teachings available to you through our website on a subscription basis or via our Apple and Android apps on an a la carte basis. Whichever method you choose, we promise to deliver new insights into the living Word of God as seen through the eyes of a Jewish believer. If you hunger and thirst like millions around the world for a deeper walk with God and the revelation of new understanding of the Scriptures, visit ignitingnation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library or on any device with our free app. Don't let another day go by without receiving your heart's desire for a new depth of understanding into all of God's Word. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitingnation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitingnation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with David Riffel, author of the book Mentoring Warriors, coming alongside men 18 to 30 years old. You can find out more at mentoring-warriors.com. David, welcome back.
Oh, good to be here.
David, you talk about these 6 key areas of life. Walk us through those really 6 major points that are based on biblical principles for healthy mentoring relationships.
Sure. You know, it seems like whenever I'm meeting with a young man, particularly we're talking about life, it seems like these 6 areas we're touching on one way or another. And the scriptures, Christ has something to say about all of them. So one of them is self-management. A young man I know, he is literally today moving out of home for the first time in 22 years, and he's getting an apartment. And, you know, he said, my room is a bomb at home, and I've got to figure out how to manage and sort life and, you know, start cooking on my own, and all is exciting adventure, but he doesn't know what to do. You know, there's some questions he has. And so anyway, self-management, time management, financial management. When you're moving out of adolescence into young adulthood, you start getting your first taste of these things that now it's your responsibility. You got to own up to some of this, so self-management's a really big deal. I had one young guy that he had some problems with his car, didn't manage money well, and needed $100 to get his car towed to the shop. Wanted me to pay for it. Well, you know, I could probably afford $100. But here's the question. Would that $100 help him in learning self-management, or would it enable a problem that he already has? And when you're thinking like a mentor, you're thinking, okay, so we managed to get the car over there. I didn't pay the $100. Then we get there, and you know, of course, you know the next side of the story. Well, now it's $1,600 in repairs. Hey, could I borrow that money from you? I'll pay you back. Really? Will you? And so learning self-management is realized you help them kind of think through. You're not telling them what to do. But in the end, you realize, you know, it's probably wiser for me to just sell that car as it is than to put $1,600 in it and go get something different. And so guiding young guys to be good stewards is really important. The other area is life skills. I always like to tease, we can go on YouTube to figure out how to fix this or change that or whatever. But there is something to be said about bringing along somebody who knows that, who's done that, who's changed out the oil or replaced the brakes on your car. He can come over and guide you and help you. Those are life skills that just some guys, we just need to learn them. That doesn't mean that you have to be a master technician, but learning basic skills is something that every guy needs to learn. The next big one is education and career. And this really boils down to the question, how am I wired? What am I going to be when I grow up? How has God uniquely wired me? A phrase that I use a lot with these young guys is, what is your unique kingdom voice? I'll give you a classic example. A young man I'm mentoring, he went into mechanical engineering in university because, well, that's what his dad did, right? He hated math. I mean, it just was not going anywhere great. His grades weren't doing well. And so through a lot of counsel, a lot of prayer, a lot of talking, a lot of rehashing things, he switched over to graphic design. And it's like he's in his element. It's just coming out. And that shift has really opened up him more opportunities where he can use his gifts for the kingdom. In fact, is our Mentoring Warriors logo even is something that he developed. So guiding men to understand how God's wired them, how that affects their education, their careers, that's a really big thing, and God speaks to that. The other one that you and I talked about, my own faith journey, when did my faith become my own, is the next one, faith. And that is the big question. Is it your mom and dad's faith? Is it your faith? What do you really believe about the scriptures, about Christ? Is he who he says he is? There are some things. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking with a young guy who's in his early 20s and just saying, I really need to get a better handle on understanding doctrine. because I realize when I understand doctrine, I understand more of my own identity. And he's figuring it out, you know. It's not just mom and dad's faith, and it's not a Sunday only thing. It's my life, it's my relationship. It's Christ living his life through me, like Galatians 2:20. So we talk a lot about faith. Next big one is relationships. In Scripture, way back in Genesis, what does it say? A man's going to what? Leave his father and mother, cling to his wife, the two will become one flesh. And I joke, a lot of these guys, they like the last half of that verse, right? Cling to their wife, become one flesh. But there's that first part. You got to leave mom and dad. And so a lot of times in those warrior years, it is learning to change, make that transition. Just like I mentioned, this young guy moving out of his home today, first time in 22 years, you know? And it's part of how do I leave mom and dad in a healthy way so the relationship's good. But mom and dad, you're part of the equation here too. How do you allow your son in particular to leave in a healthy way without being controlling? You know, well-intended parents who love their parent, you know, they love their kids, they love Jesus, but don't know always how to let go. So we talk about that. And then the other side is, you know, dating, relationships, marriage. There's something you made a comment to earlier about the Proverbs 31 wife and the Proverbs 31 man. One of the things I talk about with these guys is the fact that you need to become an Ephesians 5 husband. And that doesn't start on the day that you say I do at the wedding ceremony. It starts long before that, starting to think like a husband. And our model is what? It says in Ephesians 5, it's Christ. Christ, how he loves the church and gave himself up for us. So we talk a lot about those transitions. How do you know she's the right one? You know, one of the things that my wife and I have done through mentoring is we've probably had 3 or 4 couples now that we've done their premarital counseling. And that's just a joy for my wife and I to speak into a younger generation and to walk with them. So relationships, and then the last one is what I call manhood identity. What does it mean to be a man? Scripture is just full of godly men that weren't perfect. David wasn't perfect. But look at his heart for God. Look how God used him. Look in 1 Corinthians 16 where it talks about being watchful, acting like men, be strong. So we talk a lot about manhood identity, and then that's connected really tight with that is purity. Pornography is a major issue among men, and particularly in this generation. And you can have guys that, as I say, they love Jesus, but they are struggling in that area of purity. So we talk a lot about purity and what does that look like, and how do we as men live out 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, where we treat our bodies with holiness and with honor. So those are the 6 areas we're constantly talking about. If you go to our website, we talk a lot about those different topics too. You can go find different posts and resources on there too. But those are really big ones.
You know, in Jesus' relationship with his disciples, there's a component that most don't like to talk about, but he was quite direct in correction. He was quite direct in calling them out for behaviors, for attitudes, for not, his statement, "Are you so dull? How long will I put up with you?" In trying to help, knowing that he only had 3.5 years. The time was short, that they needed to learn the lessons and own the lessons that were being given to them. In these mentoring relationships, is there that candid, is there need to be that candid, open, really open, straightforward discussion of calling into accountability and correction when there are behaviors exhibited that are not beneficial. Because Paul says, in today, all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. So you have all these choices, a smorgasbord of choices in life that they're all free to you. You can eat what you want, you can do what you want, you can watch your porno, you can do all these things, but that's not all beneficial. What responsibility does the mentor have? And we only have a couple of minutes left in the segment, unfortunately. But what responsibility does the mentor have in keeping a good system of checks and balances, not just for himself, but also for the one he's mentoring?
Right. So two things there I would say. One is, if I'm a mentor and I don't say anything about some behaviors that I see are destructive, I'm enabling the problem. Shame on me. Shame on me. Part of the investment in these young guys is to say, you know what, love you, man, but you're doing stupid right now. Now, I'm not telling you why I'm saying that I'm any better than you, but I'm saying by the grace of God, if you give these areas over to the Lord, he can make some changes. I have this drawing I like to do where we look at behaviors, and those are symptoms, those are evidences of what's going on in the heart. And so we try to tie that string from those behaviors back to what is broken in your heart that's causing you to want to do that. It goes back to those kind of what we call father wounds and those two core questions we asked about delight and validation. And so that's something that I try to do, not to be judgmental, not to be that at all, but to say, you know what, you're going down a path right now that if you continue, you really want to be a porn addict? You really want to be that? You want to be that in 5 years from now or 10 years from now when you're married, and your wife, you're going to mess up your marriage like that? You really want to? It's like I love you enough that there is a need for some exhortation here. You know?
I'm very
and
fond,
sometimes these guys are asking for
right.
that.
I'm very fond of saying to men, you realize what you're watching is someone else's daughter. Do you want that to be your daughter? And it's a stunning, in-your-face kind of bold statement. And so it's important that we are straightforward. We've been talking with David Riffel, author of Mentoring Warriors, coming alongside men 18 to 30 years old. You can visit his website, mentoring-warriors.com, and there are a ton of resources, assessment tools, resources for you. And if you feel the call to get into mentoring and you want to reach out to David about how to do it in your community, they are looking to find ways to possibly replicate this boot camp and take this on the road. So the more support you can give him, encouragement you can give him, the more we can see this generation that we have such a burden for in these very difficult and challenging times, to see some of the answers and new development take place in their life. I strongly encourage you to come alongside of Mentoring Warriors. mentoring-warriors.com, and David Riffel. Visit IgniteingANation.com and click on today's broadcast calendar and you'll see. It says, love the interview, get the book. Click on that and a copy of this book will be on its way to you. David Riffel, thank you for sharing this with us. God bless you, and may the Lord bless all the works of your hand as you continue to speak into the lives of these mighty warriors that are being raised up. Thank you.
No, thank you for being on, for having me be on today too.
You're welcome. God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.